Hi, everyone. Welcome to today's web chat. My name is Dan Tillapaugh, and I'm an assistant professor of counselor education at California Lutheran University. And today we're talking with two of our recent grads from the counselor education department who chose to do a thesis. And so I'm going to ask them to do a brief introduction of themselves, and then we will move into some conversation questions around how they chose their topic, whittling things down, different resources that they used, and sort of their thoughts and reflections on the process. And so I'm going to ask Andrea to be the first to introduce herself.
Hi, everybody. My name's Andrea Medrano, and I, like Dr. Tillapaugh said, I'm a recent graduate. I went through the counselor education program with the pupil personnel services credential, so master in counseling, and my credential is in K through 12 counseling. So that's pretty much it.
Great, thanks. Brooke.
Hi, I'm Brook Masters, and I was in the graduating class of 2017 for the CSP program, so Counseling and College Student Personnel Program. And so that's the higher ed sort of end of the spectrum. But prior to the program, I was in the K-12 sector working as a college counselor in a 9th through 12th independent school.
Great. Well, thank you both for being here and getting up early and trying to take part of your day out to talk to us about this. So the first question is, could you briefly describe and discuss your master's research in terms of the thesis that you wrote, and particularly what interests you in talking about that topic? And Brooke, I'm going to ask you to go first.
Sure. So the title of my thesis, let's see if I get this right, was Differences in the perceptions of support for LGBTQ individuals at a small, private, religiously affiliated institution. I think I spoke English just now. So my interest in that thesis topic, and we'll get into how it evolved, but the majority of my master's program, that was the focus of my program, essentially. How I individualized my program was focusing on supporting LGBTQ individuals in higher education, along with other underrepresented and underserved populations. But every time there was a project that was like, pick a topic, pick a population, I generally chose somewhere within that spectrum of supporting LGBTQ students in higher ed.
Great, thank you. Andrea, how about you?
So my title of my thesis was Counseling and Guidance in K through 8 Catholic Education, Catholic schools specifically in Southern California. And I basically chose that because I do have a long background in Catholic education as a parent and as a teacher. So the last about 3 to 4 years, I've been working as a substitute teacher in that environment. And so it kind of, we'll get into why I chose that, but I think noticing the lack of that department of counseling kind of spurred me to go into that research.
Great, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
I'm just readjusting, putting on some headphones now. One of the hardest parts of doing research sometimes can be narrowing that focus, and some of the students in my section particularly have talked about that challenge. Can you talk about what your original idea for your master's thesis was and how that may have shifted or narrowed over time? And Andrea, maybe you want to start this time.
Yeah, so my first thought was the fact that there are no school counselors in these schools. And why? Like, basically, probably the obvious reason was funding, but we really couldn't, I really wanted to figure out why. Why wasn't there? There's got to be a need. But that was very broad. Counseling and guide, like, where do I go from here? Like, and so it started out very broad, and I had a lot of help from Dr. Dominguez, who was my mentor along the way, and basically really trying to narrow it down. Like what did we really want to focus on as far as that research? And so I really kind of had to look at, and especially with the information being so limited as far as literature and research that was already available, there really was not a lot to go on. So I really kind of had to come up with, okay, so what are some of the issues going on in these schools in particular that are affected by, or could be affected by, a counselor or a counseling program if they were implemented in the schools. So, I kind of had to focus on, bullying as an issue. And I really just had to kind of narrow down some of the aspects and make it a little bit more specific, because that whole first concept of why aren't there counselors, what would they be doing, was just really broad. So that was a huge piece in determining how I was going to do my research.
For sure. Yeah. Brooke.
Can I ask Andrea a question before I answer?
Of course.
Yeah. Andrea, was your research qualitative or quantitative?
It was qualitative.
Okay. And did you always start with wanting it to be qual?
No. Mm-mm.
Okay.
No. It was, I wasn't really sure how I was going to go about it, because I think that the time factor had a lot to do with it. I think I would have liked to go a little more quantitative and get a little bit broader input from, parents, teachers, administrators, and I really trying to narrow it down into that little 3-month period was just kind of difficult. And I think I would have liked maybe that quantitative piece in maybe a further project, but I had to kind of stick with that qualitative instead.
Okay, so my original idea was this particular institution that I was researching had never done a campus climate assessment for the climate of support for LGBTQ individuals. And throughout my program, I had been exposed to many, many, many campus climate reports at various institutions. And so I think the original vision that I had was to do a full campus climate assessment at the institution. And that would have included sending an email, a quantitative survey from every single community member, faculty, administration, staff, and student. And a true campus climate assessment would probably solicit, responses from everybody and then start to analyze. And as I talked with various mentors about that idea, I was strongly encouraged to narrow that down. I worked closely with the institutional research office and sort of began to understand that you actually don't get access to every single email, that they create a sample set for you that's sort of randomized and supposed to give a good cross-section of the university. But so basically I went from wanting to survey the entire population and do that full research and assessment to removing admin, faculty, and staff, focusing on students only, focusing on students who had the most contact with the campus. So eliminating other subsections of the student population, like online students or part-time students, things like that, and just narrowing it down to the core student body. And then rather than going, I didn't really have time to go full, I was very new to quantitative research, which was a huge challenge for me as well. And so I went with very basic descriptive analysis, statistical analysis, rather than like the full regression analysis, like all the, I don't even know the words anymore. It's been like 2 months since I've been in my research class. So, but I kept it very simple and did everything within Qualtrics. And when I say simple, simpler than it would have been had I gone with the full scope of the study that I had originally intended.
Great. What resources did you use to help you through the data collection and analysis, as well as writing up the research? And Brooke, maybe you can start us off with this.
Oh, sure. What resource did I not use? I relied heavily on faculty mentors and also just colleagues. So I think, I worked closely with Dr. Tillapaugh, like texting Dr. T night and day. My supervisor last year was the director of residential life and student conduct at Cal Lutheran, Dr. Chris Paul, and I relied on her wisdom quite a lot. Obviously my faculty advisor for the last section, I had 3 different teachers throughout my research path. So 509, 510, and 599 were all different professors.
How was that?
Yeah, we'll probably talk a little bit more about that, I think. But I started with Dr. Dominguez online. Right. Andrea, you and I started in 509 online together, and then I moved to another professor for 510, and then Maureen Lorimer, Dr. Lorimer for 599, who was fantastic, and she worked very hard to sort of catch me up. I don't think I had a very strong foundation going into 599, so she worked with me really diligently to catch me up. So I used those resources that were at my fingertips, but also other friends who had done dissertations and who were more data, math, analysis, statistical skills that I didn't have. I used another professor friend, Dr. Paloma Vargas at Cal Lutheran, to teach me everything that I now know about Excel and how to create. I mean, it was a team effort. Yeah. It took a community to get Brook to do a thesis. But I think one of the most useful in the writing of the thesis was Dr. Eulendahl had given me, in fact, I still have it here and need to return it to the office, a bound copy of a prior alum's thesis. And while that student did qualitative, not quantitative, even some of the little silly pieces that I didn't think about that took time at the end, like the acknowledgments page, or how the table of contents appeared, or what is it, all of those things, having an actual bound copy of a thesis, a completed thesis, was so helpful to me. So I referenced that many times, as well as other ones that I found online.
That's great. Thanks. Andrea, how about you?
A lot of similar things as what Brook was saying, but I think probably my very first step was meeting with Dr. Monshine. And I think that's a huge asset that we have at CLU. And he will meet with you anytime. I mean, he's always available. He is one of the nicest people you will ever meet. And no matter what your research topic is, he is such a wealth of knowledge, and he will really help you. And I think that was probably my number one as far as getting my research started and my data collection. Not my data, but like my literature and my lit review and getting all that started. That was probably huge. And so, learning about all the databases and accessing those from home and being able to get all that information and getting everything printed out and where do I begin? I mean, that was really great. Also, I think Dr. Dominguez was also a huge help. I kept, unlike Brook, I kept Dr. Dominguez all 3 semesters because, he was sort of like this was like a real reach for me to do this thesis. And so I kind of felt comfortable from the very beginning and just decided to stay with him, and had to work a little magic in order to do that. But I made sure I stayed with him. And so he kind of really, truly was my mentor through the whole process. And he was available day and night. Like if I call, text, if I had questions, if I needed anything. So that was a huge advantage and a lot of help too. Whenever I had any questions, like, well, what am I going to do? I'm trying to decide what qualitative, quantitative, anything I needed, he was usually there and he usually had the right answers. So that was a big help. He also provided us with about 4 to 5 different theses that were done prior. And basically uploaded those on Blackboard, and then we were able to access those and go through those. And that was very helpful. Same thing, Brook, like just to have that example, where do I begin? Like have that format to look at and go off of. And he actually even created templates for us to go off of in 509 and in 510 to get us started on, each section of the thesis and what we were doing. And I also use the program called Perla. I don't know if you're familiar with that as well. But one of my instructors in my very first classes in the program at CLU talked to us about Perla, which is PERRLA, which is a software program that you can download, and they specifically format APA. And so although you still have to have that grasp of APA and how you format and how you do, I still had my blue book. another extremely valuable resource, by the way, to always have handy. I had my blue book, but it was helpful as far as the little techie type things, the spacing and the margins and getting all that stuff correct. I mean, at this point you've been writing APA for quite some time, but a thesis is kind of a different feel, and it could be really overwhelming because it's so long. And so I think that was really a resource too that helped me out a lot. So I would recommend that.
Yeah,
sure.
That's great. And just, I know you talked about Dr. Munshine, and just to reiterate for folks who don't know, Dr. Munshine is one of the reference librarians in the library, right? And so that piece about, just to make that explicit for folks who don't know who Dr. Munshine is or where.
Why did I skip that step? What is wrong with me? I never met with Dr. Munshine. Dang.
Well, what's funny is because I was in Oxnard the whole time, he came in the very beginning. I think Dr. Coronado had him come and
I remember that.
To one of our classes, and he gave like a whole presentation about using all the different databases and everything online. And then I ended up meeting with him again on my own on campus a couple of times just to kind of get a little bit more, because getting all that data in the very beginning was like, whoa, like I don't even know how to access this stuff. Like, and you could create your own accounts and your own files to put everything in. And so all of it was great, but I think having, being able, and he's, like I said, he's always available, and being able to meet with him was really, really helpful too.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So, the big question for a lot of students, they're trying to make the decision, right? Many of folks are like, comps are just going to be easier. I can study for comps. And so making that decision between thesis or comps, especially for our program, is a big one. So why in the end did you decide that you wanted to write a thesis? And Brooke, I'll ask you to start us off for this one.
I think it was maybe the first semester of the program for me that I think it was Dr. Coronado said, you're going to do thesis. And so that bug had been planted in my ear. And I'll say a lot of it was sheer ignorance. I didn't really know what that meant. And, so much of this whole master's program was like, brand new for me. I came from a musical theater background, so even writing papers was totally new for me. So I didn't know what comp exams were, and I didn't know what a thesis was. And by the time that I had to choose, I still didn't really know the difference. So a lot of my perspective is retrospective, and I can say that I think a thesis is harder. Do you agree, Andrea?
Yes. Yeah.
I think that, the comp exams, from what I saw, like there's a lot of support, like folks get together and study as a cohort, and there's a whole bunch of stress and tension, and, but it's a shorter duration, whereas the thesis stress is, and I think Andrea had this experience too. Our experience with thesis was we were the only ones in our program doing it. So it was much more isolating, and we didn't have like a little family. But some of the early reasons that I was thinking, I love to write, so that was part of it. I really love research, and I found out even more how much I love research going through this process. And I think that maybe you have to have that kind of like, if you find yourself going down the rabbit hole of article reviews anyway, like when you're writing a normal paper or when you're thinking about a topic for a class, and you find yourself like kind of Google scholaring yourself into the wee hours of the morning, then that might indicate that this is a good pathway for you, and that you have that kind of curious, insatiable desire to know more. And so I think those two things were like, yeah, this is probably, and then quite frankly, at some point I would like to do a PhD. And I thought that this would be a good setup for that. I think I had a lot of passion about my topic as well, and really wanting to give back to the program, to the field of research around that topic. And my thesis, and took me, I mean, it was like getting on a plane and not really knowing where your destination was going. And it took me into not only external places of research that I hadn't anticipated, but internal processes of self-exploration that I hadn't anticipated. So I will say two things about, I wouldn't change it. I would not go back and not do thesis, even though it was, I might do things differently, and it was very challenging. But what I will say is, of all the things that I did in the program, that thesis experience gave me both the most tangible skills that I didn't have prior to, that I think will be useful in the field: data collection, analysis, Excel skills, understanding a little bit of quantitative, the difference between quantitative and qualitative, how to quickly read research articles, how to sort of categorize and organize material in my mind, those sorts of things that I think will be useful. But it also was one of the most transformative, in terms of my inner experience, pieces that I did in the program, and connected me with things that were totally outside of my intention, specifically around spirituality, and how do we begin to heal the relationship between our spiritual selves and our sexuality or gender identities that have been sort of ripped asunder based on cultural and societal stigma and discrimination. And that has been really powerful for me.
That's great. Thanks.
Yeah. Awesome.
Andrea.
So my experience, I think, trying to decide what I was going to do, I don't think I really had made that decision until 509. I think all along I was just going to go with the crowd and do the comps. And I really started after we did 509, and then I realized, okay, well, we're writing this in 509 and we're doing this in 5010. I'm like, so basically I'm more than halfway with these classes. I'm like, why would I, and it just sort of made sense to me in my situation that, like, I'm already doing all of this work. Why not finish it? Why not just go for it and complete it and have that, something, like Brook said, something tangible. And for me, that was probably one of the biggest decisions, was that this is something I'm going to walk away with. I'm going to have this paper forever. I'm going to have this labor of love that took literally a year to do. Mm-hmm. And I'm going to come away with that. And it's something I'm always going to have. And, taking a comp, I mean, anybody can take a test. Anybody could take a final. Anybody, not that I'm not discrediting that, because I know it was very difficult. I'm very excited and I was proud for everybody, but Brook said, it is a little isolating because, I was in this tight-knit cohort of 9 people, and everybody's like doing study groups and doing this and doing that. And they're kind of looking at me like I'm crazy. Like, what were you thinking? Why did you want to do this? And I literally had people tell me, you're crazy. Why would you want to do this paper? But the biggest thing for me was I sort of had this, when I was trying to come up with a topic just for 509, at this point, I wasn't even thinking thesis yet. And I had this aha moment of my topic, and having, and I'll be honest, it had a lot to do with my own children and an experience that happened with my own daughter. And so looking at that and thinking of all the other kids that are sort of affected by this that I've known throughout the years, personally and professionally, I was like, no, this is it. Like, I just had this aha moment, and all of a sudden I became passionate about it. And that was the one thing that, Dr. Dominguez kept expressing, was it has to be something that you're passionate about, or else you're never going to make it. And so once I nailed down my thesis and I started thinking about the topic and delving into it more and more, and then started doing the research on it. And I was like, yes, like it all just kind of started to come together for me. And so it was something I was definitely like passionate about. And so after 509, there was no question that that's what I really wanted. So even if you've been back and forth about, the whole thing. And then when I figured out the research that I was actually going to do, and that it was going to be qualitative, and what an awesome experience this is going to be for me as an educator, as a student, as a parent. It just got more exciting as it went along. And I think by 5:10, I was like, no, I'm definitely doing this. Like, this is what I'm going to do. I'm doing this work anyways. I'm laying the groundwork for it now. I know the harder stuff is yet to come with 599, but that to me was the exciting part. So, I got through the sort of, I don't want to say boring part, maybe the little bit more laborious part. But then when I got into that part, I was like, this is the cool part, the research. This is where I'm going to find everything out. And this is where I'm going to make all my connections and be like, yeah, this is what I'm talking about. So once I was able to do that, it was kind of a no-brainer for me after that. And then it just became like my passion. And it really, truly was a labor of love for me, because it had so much to do with what was happening with my kids and so many kids they knew. And then it was no question. Like, yeah, this is what I'm going to do.
Absolutely. Well, and I think it is fair to say that, like, the lit review is boring. I mean, like, it's giving you information, right? But like, I think writing the lit review for me is always the most challenging part of any project I work on. And once you move over that hump and get over that sort of like that place, then the cool stuff happens. Because then, especially if you're really passionate about sort of what you're doing,
right,
that hearing either the narratives that you're getting from interviews or being able to see real-time numbers. I mean, again, like, I remember the day that, like, Brooke hit send on the survey, and then, like, suddenly, like, people are taking it. Like, those moments. Yeah. That's the really cool part of actually getting to do a study where, again, like, I think what you've both been naming around the differences between doing comps and doing your own research, the sense of ownership that you get of this is your project, and you are the driver and the decision maker. And yes, you have lots of folks who are accompanying you, who can sort of help you sort of, if you're going off the tracks, getting you back on and all of that. But I think that there's something really tremendous about, like, I wrote this, and no one can take that away from me. Like, Andrea, you're saying, like, anybody can take a test, like, right. And that's true. And again, there's no judgment about that. But, like, if you have this, like, document, this publication that you have created that is substantial, there is a sense of pride that, like, of seeing that on the bookshelf every single time you walk past it. Yeah, Brooke.
And also, I think when you have a comp exam, it's like a pass fail, and there's no individuation within that, and there's no way to distinguish yourself from your classmates.
Yep.
And so much about education is, Andrea just talked about her personal passion around this topic, and mine, obviously I am a member of the LGBTQ community and found myself at a small private religiously affiliated institution, and so those things, what do we bring of ourselves into our work, is what is going to differentiate. And now that I've been through the interview process, the job search, and the application process, those things continue to be the ways that we talk about ourselves and how we are going, us specifically, how we will impact the lives of the students or the institution that we work for. And that thesis is really a way to have your voice and your skill set and your passions and your life experience come to life right in front of you in this immense project that you're working on.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I too, like Brooke, I'm hoping to pursue a PhD later or an EDD later on down the line. Mm-hmm. So I was sort of advised by a few of my professors that if this is something you're even thinking about in the future, do it. So I'm glad, I was like, it's not going to hurt, It was kind of, to me, there was no disadvantages in doing it. There was only good things about it. So
Sure.
it was pretty easy to make that decision finally at that point.
Yeah.
I'll say one of the gifts that I gave myself that I didn't realize I was giving myself at the time was when we took 509. It was in the summer, right, Andrea?
Yeah.
It was a summer online course.
Yeah.
And in that course, we wrote chapters 1 and 2. Is that right?
I think so. Yeah.
What I know is that what I walked away with from 509 exceeded like the minimum requirements of the professor. And it was kind of, I did that knowing that I was going to go forward. And so
Right.
I think that the final was something like, the requirement was like 7 to 12 pages or something. But I walked away with like 25 pages.
Yeah.
And I'll say that I helped myself out so much by doing that, by really not cutting corners on the lit review, by writing a really thorough chapter 1. And it freed me up for moving forward into chapters 3, 4, and 5 by having a really strong foundation. And if I hadn't done that, I think 510 I would have started to get scared and overwhelmed by the workload. So that was one of the things that that helped me out was sort of working, and it was summer, so I had a little bit more time to do it, but to really go above and beyond in 509.
It was a little challenging, though, in the summer because you don't have as much time as you would have in a regular semester.
That's true. In terms of the course.
I remember going, oh, my gosh, how am I going to do all this? But at the same time, I think another thing to keep in mind is at the beginning, it all seems so daunting. And I remember I consider myself a decent writer, and I do love to write, so that helped. But I think I was like, I don't, would I like to do a thesis? Yeah. Am I able to do a thesis? I don't know. Like, am I at that level? I'm at this point to do something like that. And after I really talked a lot with Dr. Dominguez about it, and I said, you've seen my writing, my abilities. I'm not sure about myself. What are you thinking? And he was like, absolutely, you're ready. You can do this. You've got this. And he was excited because I was the first counseling student he had ever had to complete a thesis. So he was like really excited. He's like, wow, I can't believe you're doing this. And that's so great. And so I always said I was like his guinea pig, because he's used to like all these teachers and everything. But I think just, really having, and that was kind of different too, I think, for us, Brooke, is being in this forum of everybody's, really a teacher, and they're getting their master's in education rather than like counseling and guidance like us. I think it was similar, but it, it had its differences too. And a lot of the people I know were, had been in education for years and years and years. That really wasn't the case for me. So, you get different aspects, which is great because, you're having like these discussion boards and you're learning from different experience and everything. But, honestly, I was kind of a little bummed that more of my classmates didn't even consider doing it, because yes, it's daunting and it's scary, but like everything else, you just take things one step at a time. And I was not confident that it was something I was going to be able to finish, but I sort of took a leap. And I think that's important because if it's something you really want to do and you're passionate about, it's all going to fall into line. It's just like with everything, you just have to take it step by step. And that's what the program really does. And all I heard was like, 509, I'm not even writing a thesis. Why do I have to take 509? Why do I have to take 510? And why? But the information, either way, no matter which route you decide, the information is very valuable, and it could be very valuable in your future, and you never know.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So,
well, and a lot of what you just both talked about, there's like, that's why we made some changes, right? So now the sections of 509 and 510 are counselor ed only. We pulled that back, right? So now we actually haven't merged across programs, so there are separate learning and teaching sections and separate counselor ed sections so that there's some consistency and some levels of support, so that way folks are actually getting content expertise from folks who have content expertise teaching those classes.
So Dan, as students move into 599, will they be paired with like a faculty mentor, or you're going to teach 599?
I'm teaching 599 for counselor ed.
Good. Okay.
So anybody who's going to write a thesis,
that's awesome,
is going to be funneled into my section, and so
that's
I'll
great.
be shepherding those projects.
That's great, because unlike Andrea, my experience in 510 was counseling students ignore this because you're not writing a thesis, like again and again and again, and it was really it was a bummer, you know. And I actually, my cohort started with, I think the majority of everybody had intended to do thesis. And because of being discouraged or feeling frustrated with their various sections, they changed courses midway, and it's too bad. And I think, you know, that's really where you start to see the value of thesis in recognizing, look at all these voices that we lost along the way, these incredible minds who had something really significant to contribute in terms of research and experience. And I'm sad that my familia did not get to write those theses.
For sure. Absolutely. Absolutely. So, you know, recognizing that we have about 10 minutes left, I have two more questions that I want to make sure that we get to. And so the first is sort of, again, is there anything that you would do differently now that you've had some time since completing your research? So is there anything that you would do maybe differently, or if you had to think about that, maybe there would be tweaks? And whoever would like to go first can go first.
Okay, so mine's really quick. I think probably for me, the most frustrating part was that I didn't get as many participants as I wanted. And I chose to do qualitative because I really wanted to get some in-depth information as to, you know, the student population and what their needs were, and sort of use it as a needs assessment, as well as, you know, proving my point that, you know, there are counselors needed in these schools. I had a lot of difficulty, even though I did have help personally getting, you know, the participants that I got. I only had five or six. And my goal was to get between, I think, 7 to 9. But I could not get, you know, and people are just so busy. And even though, it didn't take a lot of time, it still was difficult, and to get to get more people on board. And I was ready to sort of start that recruitment process earlier, but the sort of waiting for the IRB process to go through and the approval, I really, you know, I kept, can I, you know, asking Dr. Dominguez, can I do this now? Can I do this? And he was just like, you got to wait for that IRB approval. That was difficult. I think maybe learning a little bit more about the IRB process would have been a little bit more helpful. There was only so much I could do at that point, but I would have liked to have maybe figured out a little bit better of a way to get more participants in my qualitative research. But, you know, all in all, I think for the time that I was given, I think it was a good sample. So because of the diversity in my participants and where they were in the area, I did get a good cross section, but I think it would have been nice to be a little bit, maybe a few more, but that probably would have been something I would have liked to have done differently. I don't know how much I had control over that, like I said, but that would have been good.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I agree. I think the pieces that I found most frustrating were the pieces that were outside of my control. And that's not my door, right?
No, it's mine.
Okay. And you know, I mean, I submitted the IRB application early. I did all the things that I could have done. It's hard, you know, honestly, if I'm coming from the perspective of how could I have made my life easier, I could have had a third of the questions on my survey that I actually did. But I don't want to change what I did. It was so incredibly powerful and useful, and the depth and richness of the data that I got. I mean, you know, I made my life difficult by doing better work.
I'm sorry.
Hello.
It's the plumber. The plumber's here.
No worries.
Even certain things like Dr. Tillapaugh very kindly suggested that the 2 open-ended questions that I had in my survey, that I not do like analysis around, and just use it as a point of reference to triangulate. And in the end, I still coded and themed those questions and did all the charts and stuff, and it made my life harder, but I think it was really useful in the final product that I created. So I think the hardest thing for me, looking back on it, was that Thesis was on top of the job search and application, which was also on top of my field work, and my graduate assistantship, so a full-time job, field work, an extra part-time job because I needed more money, and the job search and application. And if there was any way that I could have gone back and separated some of those things out, I think I would not have been so overwhelmed. And then literally and truly, your last semester, if you don't already have a full-time job, that last semester of the program, focusing much more diligently on job application and search process, I didn't realize, so that was the timeline of that would look the way that it does now. So, and I have, if anybody has questions about that, I have more advice, but I'll save it for a different topic or a different panel. But so those are the things that I might look at, is just to really consider how to make my life easier in terms of the things that were on my plate.
Sure. Well, and some of that probably leads into the next sort of final question, which is, what advice would you give to other students who are contemplating doing the thesis? And so maybe Brooke, if you want to get us started.
My advice is do it. And it will be the hardest thing that you do in the program, for sure. And there's no sugarcoating that. It's very challenging. It's very difficult, but in a really exciting and empowering way. And I know that, I would talk with anybody for hours who was interested in doing thesis, and I'm sure Andrea feels the same way. So you do have a community of support out there, even if it's not within your own cohort. You will learn so much. And I think, a piece of advice that I didn't listen to that I would give in a hypocritical fashion is, this isn't your life's work. This isn't the only research you will ever do in your life, and it doesn't have to be the defining moment of your entire career. I totally disregarded that. I thought this is going to be the thing. But if you could set your ego aside and really look at the project as a project, as an exercise, as practice for future research endeavors that I certainly hope to be involved in, and I'm sure others will as well, that you can bite off a smaller chunk, and it doesn't have to kill you. I mean, it doesn't have to be so overwhelming. It can be modest. Modesty is not my strong suit, so I failed at that, but I would give that advice.
That's great.
Yeah, I think same as Brooke, that it's if you're on the fence about whether you want to do this or not, I would say do it as well. I have no regrets. I wouldn't go back and change anything at all. Walking away, in fact, that reminds me, I need to go pick up my bound copy.
I haven't done that yet.
I know it's ready. I got to pick it up. But I think it's something that, like Brooke said, no one can take that away from you. It's something that it's your hard work. It's something that you've done. And probably the one thing that has stood out this whole time, and that I can't reiterate enough, is just it has to be something that you are passionate about. For me, it had to do with my children, and my children are my passion. I have 4 of them. So, and it's something that's going to affect or has affected each one of them. And that was kind of one of the things I was looking at. People were choosing in 509 were topics that had been done. And that's another thing, another piece of advice I had gotten is going through research for my lit review, is that what I was doing has never been done. There was no articles about what I was looking into in my particular topic. And some of the stuff that was there that even was remotely had to do with it was very old, very dated. So I was like, I want to do this. This is something that's going to contribute to a lot of kids. And it hasn't been done. So I did get that piece of advice along the way, was try to do something that hasn't been done, and that is your original research and your work. And I did that. So I think sticking with something that really truly means something to you is going to make it not only easier, but fun, and something that you love to do. And I really did enjoy the process, and I would recommend anybody that's thinking about doing it definitely to do it.
That's great. Brooke, did you have something else you wanted to add?
Well, I was going to say too that my encouragement to follow through with the thesis, like I had an opportunity to sit down with, after my thesis was done and completed, to sit down with leadership at the university that I was studying and present. And this was a whole separate thing where I took the data, I took the research and created a presentation, sort of bite-sized 30-minute presentation to disseminate to the institution. And that my hope is that that information can lead to change within that institution. And so to recognize, like, here is a project that you're doing that goes beyond just a Blackboard grade, that it can actually make a difference. Like Andrea is saying, I can see Andrea presenting her research at conferences for years to come, you know what I mean? And like really creating change in the industry, in the field. Mm-hmm. So it can be powerful, especially if it's connected again to that passion and that unique perspective that you bring because of your background and your life experience.
For sure. Yeah, absolutely. I think, as you've been talking over the last 45 minutes, I think 4 main points have stood out to me as sort of common themes that you've sort of talked about. So number 1, find your topic of passion, right? So if you're interested in it, that's going to be the biggest help that you can sort of do for yourself. Your project will definitely evolve. It won't necessarily be what you first started out with, and challenges will arise, but you can complete this project. It is doable. Number 3, use all of the resources available to you, including your community, your friends, available resources on campus. And then lastly, your thesis will not be the end-all be-all, but just a starting point for the next project and the bigger things that are going to come next in terms of lines of inquiry that you can sort of develop. And so I think those are 4 really important things amongst all of the other details that you shared. So thank you so much for spending your time this morning talking about these different choices that you've made, the research that you've done. I think that it's fantastic that you both have sort of done this, and while at times it may have felt lonely, I think we've tried to create some scaffolding that changes that within the program for the next group of folks who are coming behind you.
That's great.
And I think ultimately your work will serve as an example for other counselor ed students who are interested in doing thesis work. And so thank you so much for sharing your insights today.
You're welcome.
Yeah, anytime. If anybody needs a resource, don't hesitate.
Awesome. Yeah. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Dr. Tillapaugh.
Thank you.